Chris Geiger, member of the Budget Committee.
Greg Peterson, Budget Committee, Urban Renewal Commission.
Don Fox, Urban Renewal and Budget Committee.
Again, Urban Renewal and Budget Committee.
Rob Crawford, Urban Renewal and Budget Committee Chair.
Alice Norris, City Commission and Urban Renewal.
Rocky Smith, City Commission, Urban Renewal.
Jack Walters, Urban Renewal Commission.
William Gifford, Budget Committee.
AC Flash, Budget Committee.
Daphne West, City Commission, Urban Renewal and Urban Renewal Budget Committee. Holly Burgoyne, Assistant to the City Recorder.
Urban Renewal. Carlton, Budget Committee. I'm our Finance Director. This is David Fraser, City Manager.
All right, so second thing on the agenda is to review the Budget Committee process, authority, and decisions. David, you or one of the Davids want to go over that with us?
I'm sorry, I was kind of, what did you want me to do?
Review the Budget Committee process, authority, and decisions.
Okay, well, there's 19 of you on the committee. There look like there are 14 here, and regardless of how many are here, that takes 10 yes votes to do anything. So you're in business as far as the quorum and having a number of people. You're charged with hearing the budget message and looking at the numbers. The good news is there's only like 18 or 19 numbers in the whole budget, so you can each have your own numbers. One of the things we're catching up on the minutes from the last couple of years. So those are on there. And one of the first things you need to do is elect a chairperson. You don't need to elect a secretary because well, we're taking minutes and it's not required. So, but it's required to take minutes, but not to have a secretary. So probably your first order of business would be to elect a chairman.
Okay.
Chairperson.
Should we do that, or do you want to approve the minutes from last 2 years? All right. Well, let's get started now with electing a chairperson. Do we have any nominations for chair?
Nominate Rob Crawford.
A second. Any other nominations? Okay. Do we need to take all those in favor? Aye. All right. That was pretty easy. Any opposed? Thank you. All right. I will serve as chair for another year. Let's go through approval of minutes. The minutes of April 28, 2000, or I'm sorry, minutes of April 28, 2009. Do you have any amendments, changes?
Yes. There's a little typo on page 2 of 3. The paragraph that begins investment in the cove. There's a small M missing after the $20 for the jug handle. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be $20 million for the jug handle.
Yeah,
$20 for the jug handle. A little M after that. And the other thing, although I must have said something about this, I don't recall using the verb to rob in that last sentence in there. Maybe we could use the word reallocate rather than.
Which page are you on?
I want the bottom of page 2.
Good to say.
And the last one that I had was in the middle of page 3, motion by Norris to fund grants for the significant damage to the house. And I'm sure you mean Ermenegger House there because it's the next line that it refers back to it. So I would put the Ermenegger in front of the house and take it off the next one if you need to. Oh, and I wasn't quite sure. It says $100,000 to the storefront, and it says the storefront as though that was implied to be part of the Ermenegger House, and I'm sure it's not the implication there. I just thought it was awkwardly worded. Yeah.
I think that whole paragraph is messed up. You should really check the tape out because it looks like that two things have been confused there. That it's storefront grants and Ermenegger House are mixed. So we need to sort that out.
That's all I.
So, recommendations then? Do we need to change this till next year, or?
I move we adopt the minutes of April 28, 2009, and allow our city recorder to make changes as needed after referring to the tapes in those places suggested. So,
All right. Any other motions? Do you need to roll or just all in favor? All in favor? Any opposed? All right. Let's move on to the minutes of April 29, 2008. For those that were in attendance. Any amendments or changes?
For approval?
Second. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, approved. Great. We'll move on to receive the budget message from the budget officer.
Mr. Chairman. Well, this is my first budget presentation for you as your city manager on your urban renewal district. I'm going to have kind of a short PowerPoint here tonight, and then David is going to actually talk to you about the numbers. And we decided to split it up that way tonight a little bit. I'm new to Oregon City, as you all know, and I feel like I'm in a Roman pit of some kind here because it's not a dais, so you've got your side, your back. I hope the profile's working for everybody, but
You just try to leave.
yeah. But you know, urban renewal, I understand, has been hotly debated in your community, and particularly around some of the projects. And I'm not here to take a position on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. My goal is, if you're going to do it, that we do it well. I can tell you a little bit about when people ask me my vision or my philosophy for economic development. I was on a radio program once in another city after I was appointed manager, and the next day, and a caller, it was one of these live talk shows where they call in and press you for this information, and someone said, "What's your vision for the city?" And I paused for a minute. I said, "Well, my vision's whatever the city council says it is." And they haven't told me yet, except through their ordinances and comprehensive plans and so on. And I know you guys have master plans for some of these projects, and that you have a lot of history here with these projects, some of them 5-10 years old. So, you know, keep in mind that I'm a quarterback in the fourth quarter coming into the game. And from that perspective, though, I thought I'd share with you some of the observations I've had as a city manager in other states where, like, for example, the one that comes to mind is Missouri, where they're heavily reliant on sales tax as opposed to property tax. And there's been, they call them TIF districts there, tax increment financing, a very similar philosophy to what you use here. And some of those communities have, I guess you would say, overinvested in urban renewal. And then whenever they finance these with sales tax dollars, with projections that they thought were conservative, and then so they got all these malls, mostly they were big giant shopping complexes, and they got them financed, and then to pay the debt service, the increment from those sales taxes was supposed to pay that, but people started shopping online. They would go to these stores and actually, I'm going to lay on this bed, I'm going to try on this suit, and I like all this stuff, and I'm going to go home online and buy it and avoid sales tax. So that's happened a lot in those states. So urban renewal is really under some changes in those states because they haven't turned out, particularly in this recession, to be quite as solid a tool. In Oregon, the way your structure is, it's a much more reasonable tool to utilize because you don't have that same pitfall that you have in some of the sales tax states. So, you know, we use them very effectively in Grants Pass. We didn't call it urban renewal. We called it something else, but it's still organized under the urban renewal statutes, and we called it the Grants Pass Redevelopment Agency. And with it, we used it to get a hospital and create lots of high-wage jobs, and it was a very, very good, effective tool. But just like your community, there were some debate there about whether we should do it. And so far, what I've detected here in Oregon City is that the debate hasn't been so much about whether to do it, but the projects themselves have sort of, maybe the way they've been designed or presented, have caused some concerns in the community about whether they're a good or bad thing. So that seems to be more the debate, not whether they should do them, but how they should look and how they should be executed. And so with that, I'll move on a little bit. I'm going to talk somewhat too about, and this may be redundant for some people, but I just sort of want to share where I'm coming from when it comes to urban renewal. My goal as a city manager is to carry forth one of them, of course, is to execute the goals of the city commission that I report to. And so that includes the economic development goal, which is goal number 2, and that's this tool you have, urban renewal, is very important to successful execution of goal number 2 for economic development. It's not the only tool, but it's one of the very most important ones. Another thing I want to mention about economic development is that, in my view, the places it's been the most successful has always been where there's been a regional approach to economic development. So when I think about economic development in Oregon City, it's easy for us to get closed in on ourselves and think about just our community. But if there's a new state-of-the-art plant or facility somewhere in one of our neighboring cities that's going to employ, 30% of our community, we're going to be jazzed about that, because even though it's not in our city, it's still providing income and resources and a quality of life here that is important to us all. I have not yet had the chance to meet our other regional economic development partners, but I do have a whole schedule full of those meetings. And speaking of those meetings, some of you, I've never met you outside this room, so I will probably, over the next several months, you might just get a surprise call and say, would you like to make yourself available so we can have lunch together and just talk about what you think urban renewal means to you and what you'd like to achieve as an urban renewal committee member. Because I'd like to gather that information, because to me, it helps me understand what the values are in your community, and that's critically important. Particularly when we make recommendations, it's important to know what people value the most in Oregon City. So what we have here essentially is a bare bones budget, and I'm using that word because that's the one Dave Wimmer has used with all of us, and it really is true. When you look at it, it has to be balanced, so we can't spend any more than we take in, and this year you're seeing an alarmingly reduced amount of capacity to do things in the district because the revenues just aren't there. But before I get into the numbers, before Dave does, I wanted to talk a little bit about what investors are looking for, because I know there's been some debate here in the community about, well, the Rivers project went away, and why did it go away, and who's to blame, and all of that. But I think when people, in my experience in other states, has been, investors are looking for 2 things. The same things we all look for when we buy a pension fund. We don't look for Fidelity's fund that's had 6 managers in the last 4 years and lots of risk. We look for a fund that's got solid management and low risk. And so you're looking for return and risk, and you're balancing those things every time you make an urban renewal decision. And so to try to assess the risk, I look at these 2 sites principally that you have right now under consideration in your urban renewal district. And to me, the return is pretty clearly defined. The level of interest that you've had from major players who have very sophisticated abilities to evaluate the risks, I think they have targeted these areas because they see a great potential for the return. I think a lot of the risks are environmental, legal, financial, other things that can be cured or mitigated through due diligence by these various development proposals. The ones that are more troubling, though, are the ones that are more based on perception. When I think about perception and its impact on economic development, probably the most striking example we're all familiar with is 9/11. When 9/11 occurred, what happened to the stock market, within a week. And yet the fundamentals were not, there was no real difference in the fundamentals, but it was a perception that drove that. And so perception is almost as important when we talk about trying to cultivate investment in our community. It's almost as important as the reality. In some cases, it's more important. So one of the things, too, that I've seen developers do when they pull out of a project, sometimes they will, they have some financial reasons, a different philosophy. Some of them will claim that it's political instability. They'll say the city didn't work with us. I've heard all of those. Sometimes that really is the case. Other times a developer is sort of hedging their bets and saving face about why they really pulled out, because if the investment is solid enough and secure enough, they can take an incredible amount of political instability and still move forward. So I don't know how much of that jockeying and where it is in the continuum of debate in your community really lies. I just know that investors typically like to see a politically stable community when they put investments in there. And we would do the same thing if we were placing investment. An example would be using constructive political objections to try to enhance the value, for example, of an investment. One of the people I met here recently and had a discussion with about some of these projects said they were concerned about Oregon City selling out on some of these projects. And that to me is a statement about the quality and the content of the projects, not necessarily whether they should be done, but that they should be done well and consistent with the historical values of your community. That's great. That's good stuff to be vigilant about. And I think part of your role is to be vigilant so that you get the best bang for the buck from these investments. I was talking to staff today about another concern that I have, which is when we develop in the community, and this really is not just in the urban renewal district, but anywhere, when you're dependent so heavily on property tax and values of investment in the community to pay for critical services that everyone in the community enjoys and uses, the bang for the buck is pretty important because you have a finite amount of developable land in your community. And the thing that comes to mind is one end of that spectrum would be like an RV park, which doesn't generate a whole lot of increment or a whole lot of tax base, but it sure takes up a lot of room. And if you've got an RV park and you've got a Nordstrom, you've got a different level. Or if you've got a medical complex with high wage jobs there, you've got a very different footprint. You might have the same footprint, but the amount of generated income back to the community to help pay for critical services is vastly greater. So the intensity of the quality of that development is really important. So for those of you who've insisted over the years on high quality development in your community, you may have had other reasons than that for doing it, but it was a really good move, and I would encourage you to continue to be vigilant about that. So again, it's difficult to generalize about why a developer may or may not be continuing to persist in a project, but I do think it's important to recognize that there is a difference between saying we want a higher quality investment and then sending a message, we don't really want you here at all. So there's a fine line, and sometimes the irony is that if you overplay that, you can actually end up getting a lower quality investment than you intended, because you may have a developer who's interested in making a high quality investment, but they get dissuaded somehow because of instability that they actually perceive as being a lack of support, which may not be a lack of support. It may just be we want a better quality investment from you, or we're uncertain because we don't know your track record. Those kinds of things that all come into play when you're making decisions for the district. So I wanted to say a little bit about how can you send that message to investors that you want a high quality investment without destroying opportunities for economic development. And it's a very delicate situation. I stole Barack Obama's line about yes we can, because I really think you can do both of these things. Right now you've got a chance, I think, to sort of step back from some of these projects and reassess some of them and see how you might want to do them differently, not necessarily the code, because that seems to be well on track already, but with regard to this Rivers project, there may be a future opportunity there and a different way of approaching that problem. I think there's going to be conflict about any time there's a big project like that, but I think 95% of those conflicts can be worked out in ways that don't necessarily destroy the opportunity. They might actually make it better for your community. So I just encourage you, I sense that there's been frustration in the community about some of these projects, and I just want you to know that I'm here to help you vent that frustration somehow. There may be some meetings with developers individually, but if you get to that point where you just want to throw up your hands and say, I just don't have enough information, I don't feel comfortable with this, I don't know what it's going to do to my community, I'm worried about that, come talk to me. I might not have all the answers. In fact, I probably won't, but I will get them for you, and we will find a way to deal with whatever problems you're having with the project so that you can feel comfortable taking your position one way or the other, instead of just almost feeling like you want to abstain because you don't feel comfortable proceeding with it. So that's sort of my 10 minutes about urban renewal. Dave accused me, he said I was going to go for 30, and he's wrong. But anyway, are there any of you that have questions of me that you'd like to ask about my thoughts or feelings about urban renewal and where we go from here before we get into the numbers? Okay, thank you.
Chair, you got a question?
Commissioner West.
Yeah, I was going to say, so tell us a little bit about in grants past, how, or briefly, how projects were voted on, or were they not voted on? Did you have a debt limit, and how you came to make your decisions there?
Well,
And what role the public played versus the Urban Renewal Commission? Or
They had
do
two
you have any?
okay. They had two different agencies that had about a 20-year lifespan. Both of them were voter approved, just like I believe yours was voter approved. Once the voters approved it, we had a committee like this one that met, and they reviewed the project. So we didn't go out and vote every time we had a project. We spent almost all of our money on infrastructure improvements, mostly related around transportation, capacity, signals, things like that. We did buy some properties and get them what you would call shovel ready. In some cases, we even put up buildings on those properties and had turnkey facilities available. So when companies came to the city and were looking for a site, we could say we've got a building here, and we would try to design the buildings in such a way that they could be used by different companies for different purposes, so that the interior space was basically a shell ready to go, but the interior space was left optional, so you could move things around in there and make it work. I would say that the controversy about the districts, to the extent there was any in those agencies, was earlier, before my time actually. By the time I got there, they had already had the hospital come in and brought lots of high-wage jobs, and really the city's fastest growing industries were located within that district, and it was millions and millions of dollars worth of reinvestment in the community, very successful for them. Yes.
Any other questions? All right.
Before I turn over, that did stimulate one more thing I wanted to say, which was when you think about urban renewal, just the word renewal, I can't help but think about a little bit about the downtown that you have here, and how today we were talking about this grant facade program, and you'll see there's money in the budget next year for continuing that program. And I'd just like to say that if I were king for a day and didn't have to worry about process, I would be trying to put more money into that kind of a program and create some other programs for your downtown, because I think that's just critically important. I don't view in the long term that downtown will be creating a competitive market as much with some of these shopping areas that are under consideration, because the downtown here, to the extent you keep true to its history, is going to be a unique shopping experience that I think can benefit. Frankly, if I have a choice between going to a charming downtown that's been well maintained and had money injected into it, I would rather shop there than one of the mega malls. I mean, maybe you go to both places. You go to the mega mall because that's where Whole Foods is, or REI, or whatever it is you're wanting. But when you want to enjoy the experience, I think more often than not you're going to go downtown. So for my goal would be to try to find some other resources from increment that's growing and put that money into, not all of it, but a good portion of it into the downtown, so that you can sort of renew and revitalize that area of this community.
Thank you. Mr. Wilmer.
Good evening, Chair and the committee members. Oh, did you want to try it? Oh, why don't we try this? Anyway, a little bit more on the budget message. We started the year with $5.3 million, and we took in about $7.3 million from about three sources: taxes about $1.7 million, draw on the line of credit of about $3.4 million, and a loan from Morgan City of $2.1. And there were some other smaller revenue items for like rent and some little interest and miscellaneous income, but those were the big ones. The expenditure side, basically we spent $10.4 million on five projects, four big ones, and the Cove being about $3 million, The Amtrak about 1.6. The McLaughlin project almost 2 million. 145,000 for the promenade. 2.1 million on this building, and about 80,000 on the downtown grants. So then that's leaving us with like a beginning balance of about 2.2 million. You guys probably, I'm just reading for basically from the numbers that are on this sheet here, that was in your packets. And for next year, like I said, we're starting like with 2.2 million, and we're going to have about the same amount in taxes because we haven't added a lot of increments. So we have about 1.7 million again in taxes, a little bit of miscellaneous income for like rent, for totaling $67,000. Still working on the building a little bit, and we're anticipating maybe another 200,000 on that. Then we have 6.5 million to draw on a $10 million line of credit, which we'll have to draw by November of this year. So that gives us like $8 million in new revenue on top of the beginning balance for $7.7 million of resources. Then there's just a handful of projects, the same ones again. The Cove would be about 6.5 million. A little bit for Amtrak, about 50,000. The McLaughlin Boulevard project, about 308,000. Still about 15,000 for the Promenade. Again, it's 200,000 maybe for the City Hall. Then I put 120,000 in for the rehab grants, or to cover the. I'm estimating 80,000 of the 200 or 100 that we budgeted last year to be spent. So I got 20,000 carryover plus another 100,000. And for admin, we have, let's see, for outside consultants, 225,000 for reimbursement of internal charges for part of David's salary and my salary, and then the new economic development position, which is about 90% funded, I think, out of urban renewal. So we're having like 9.1 million of expenditures, and that will leave us with 1.6 million at the end of the year. However, 1.5 million of that is for debt service reserve, which is not spendable, so our actual contingency is about 34,000. That's really all it is. There's only, like I said, there's only very few numbers that make up this, the biggest by far being the Cove of 6.5 million.
I have one question. I know in the past we've talked in urban renewal about the different phases of Clackamas Cove, of the Cove project, and that we would actually be selling certain parcels of property to the developer. And I think you talked about whether or not that would be recaptured into the urban renewal budget. Is that seen in here anywhere?
It's not. And I'm not.
So that's further out than this fiscal year, though, I take it, or this budget.
Could be. I was. Like I said, I'm not in on that loop on the money coming back in, so I'm not sure exactly what those numbers are.
Well, we
Yeah.
won't know what those numbers are.
No, 2012 or something.
Until the project.
The land gets raised, and when they start doing the phases of the condos, that would be where the money comes.
So that wouldn't be till 2011, 2012. Only actually
7 years, I think, before we get that.
4-year option.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Mentioned the staff costs, are they embedded in the line under materials and services called contract services annual?
Correct.
25,604? What amount is designated for the consultant that's been David Lehman?
For all the consultants, we have 225,000.
And when was that contract where Leland awarded last? What was that case on this?
contract that Larry Patterson signed was first initiated in 2006, and it was for general consulting services.
Is it like a task order contract
I believe so.
based on billable hours?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to see that work redefined and procured.
Actually, the contract's expired, and we're in the process of doing that right now.
Okay, thank you.
If I may follow up, what do you mean by that?
The contract has expired, so the only work that they are authorized to do right now is work related to land use approvals needed for the parking lot portion of the Cove development. And so they're acting as an agent of both the Urban Renewal Agency and Tri-Cities in terms of, again, the parking lot that's under the Tri-City property.
Commissioner West.
This is just a small line item here, but I'm seeing under actual 33110 under the expenditures that for 7th and Washington Street quarters is 4659 or $4,659 spent. I'm wondering, is that flower baskets? And it doesn't appear that it was a budgeted amount. Anybody can explain that? And if not, why aren't we having it in the budget for this coming year?
Evening, Chair Crocker and Urban Renewal Commission budget people. Anyway, he does feel like a Roman fit. To answer your question, Commissioner West, we had some problems with the drainage of the sidewalk adjacent to a building that had a basement. And so we had to go in and repair that and do some significant work on their foundation wall and regrade the sidewalk. And rather than send that to an insurance claim, because we felt that there was responsibility of the project there, we went ahead and took care of that for the property owner. And yes, we hadn't budgeted for that because we didn't expect it, but it did occur. So we charged it to that old project, and we don't anticipate any of those kind of fixes for the next year.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I have one other part. And then I also see up on the revenues in the operating fund 125 and 135 there, the interest income has dropped from 40,000 down to 5,000. Can you refresh me on that one?
Well, basically rates are almost nothing, 1/2 of 1%. So. And we haven't had.
Difference.
Right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart.
Another question for Mr. Winter. You mentioned the line of credit, and you mentioned something about having to withdraw by sometime later this year, like November?
Yes, there's a 1-year draw period. 1 year from the day we signed it in November, it has to be drawn.
So if we don't draw the $10 million in the line of credit, does it go away?
Yes, it probably would, but we will draw it because that's what they normally do. Is you go ahead and, even though you haven't completed the project, they advance you the funds. Otherwise, your window is gone.
Commissioner Norris.
May I follow on that one because it says in the verbiage on the last page that the 1-year draw ends in November, but the 3-year line of credit will need to be converted to another debt instrument not later than November 2012.
Correct.
So it remains in existence.
Right. It's just a loan interest only until at the end of the 3-year period. Then you can need to convert it to probably a 20-year bond, like we did the other $10 million. We don't have to wait for that. We get sometime during the next year or two, if we decide the rates are good, we can try to go ahead and roll it to permanent at that point.
Just let me make sure I understand, because I don't think I do. So the draw period ends, and if we didn't draw, then the line of credit remains in place and can be converted, so it can be used. Not until
I think if we don't draw it, you got 3.3 million, and you have to start everything all over.
You have to start over if it is usable. Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Geiger.
When we look at the
I think we need to pull the mic over. to the public.
downtown district, when does the district end? When does it sunset? Is it an issue of maximum competitiveness or project completion or a date, or when would the downtown district end?
The sheet here, I don't know if it's not in your packets, I don't believe. I think it's on there somewhere.
It's there, but we all have paper copies.
Yeah. Anyway, our maximum bid is 130 million, so however long it takes to get to there, if you want to go all the way to the 130 million, that's how long it takes. So it'll probably be, depending on how much increment you got, it could be up to 20 years after you get spend your last money. But I mean, the way the numbers we're looking with the rivers and everything, it looked like it would have been that 130 would be met sooner and would be paid off a lot sooner. But in theory, it could go a long time.
Another question, the $2.5 million loan from the Fleet Replacement Fund, I didn't understand that. Can you explain that, what that was?
Yeah, in last year's budget, we approved a $2.5 million loan from the city to the urban renewal for the remodel of this building. Interest only for 5 years with a 5-year renewal option.
From the Fleet Replacement?
Correct. At 1.5% minimum.
Was there an adjustment made on the city side for fleet replacement, I'm assuming? Replacing it?
No, I mean, it still has plenty of money to do what it needs to do. But long term, you need to get some increments so you can pay that back. But right now, the increment we have, you just barely pay the 20 million.
Commissioner Norris, then Member Gifford, then Mr. Neal. Commissioner who's raising his hand. Sure. I'm sorry. And Commissioner
Chris reminded me that there's some, I think, this is sort of a little bit off the subject, but the legislature passed some new rules for urban renewal in the last legislature, which has really helped. I know the fire districts lobbied for that, and so I think we've asked for this. Let's not forget that at a future meeting, I think we want to be aware of those new rules. And some of them involve, I think, carving out pieces of the district early. So I think we should all be aware of that. So just want to remind you.
I wanted to build on Commissioner Norris's comments on page 4. I actually have a lot of questions. I'm a really thick guy, and I don't mean to be hung up on small details, but I'm looking at the first paragraph. The end of that first paragraph says that the new reserve is estimated at $796,340, and the line of credit requires that reserve. So the additional reserve is $408,440, but if you take that 389 from 796, it comes up to $406,440. Just a little $2,000 there. Maybe those are just estimates, but
yeah, well, they are, because we don't have any idea what the reserve is going to be. I just based upon what the last on the one we do have, the $10 million loan that we have in place. That is the reserve, and it could be more or less.
So that's just ballpark figures. That is like they would have,
right.
You just subtract B from A, you get.
We don't know for sure. I've asked the attorneys, and they haven't gotten back to me. We have to fully fund the reserve before we go into permanent financing or not. But for conservative, I put it all in here for now.
Is that reserve conceptually the same as a covenant for bonding?
It is one of the covenants.
Yeah.
But you have a debt service reserve, which normally equals your highest debt service payment out of your highest annual debt service on the life of a bond. That's okay. Or 10% of the bond. That's another way. But usually
those numbers on that page are more like estimates, and I'm not going to question the math on the other one. But we have some questions about the number pages, and we skipped right over this first one about the hilltop. But it said the actual beginning balance is 1.205.
That was for the year 2007-8. This is history. It'll drop off. You'll never see that again after this year.
I just noticed $12,000 discrepancy in that. I mean, the beginning balance was
That
about
is
22.5, and the
You started with 12, or started with 1,205,000, and you added 12,000, which is 1,217,000, and you spent 1,217,000, you're up to zero.
And on the next page, actually it was on the first page too, but the first column shows actual 2007, 2008. I'm imagining the next column is supposed to show 2008, 2009.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so there was that. Then down under expenditures under debt service reserve, I just want to be clear that in the adopted budget was $796,340, and then the proposed for next year is twice that plus $4. I mean, $796,340 twice gives you that number plus $4. But,
Yeah, I think I had a rounding thing. I put the $4 there.
okay, well, $4 is, you know, $1.5 million is that's absolutely nothing. I just wanted to know that was basically double.
That was what we were just talking about a couple minutes ago. But I'm estimating that the reserve on the 10 million, next 10 million will be the same as the last 10 million. But
Okay, great, thank you.
Commissioner Neely, then, committee member Flash.
I just need to clarify, so we have a maximum indebtedness, that's the maximum that we can attain, is that right?
that's sort of a bad terminology, indebtedness. What that means is you can borrow like $130 million over the life of the thing. And this goes back, including when we started the thing in 1989. So, and the way you calculate, whenever you borrow money and spend it on capital projects, that you add that number. But if you have miscellaneous income and go spend it, it doesn't affect that number. So it's sort of a screwy calculation. But it's, in theory, if it was a perfect world, you could go out and borrow $130 million and do $130 million in projects, and you wouldn't be doing any more. But it's not that clean. That's the theory.
What is our indebtedness, or do you know?
What is our indebtedness?
Total indebtedness.
Well, we have 10 million. Let's see, where is it?
The thing is, it's accumulated over time. Is that an accrued amount somewhere we have?
The running total I do not have. We're up around. Let's see. We were about 29, 20. I need to update that schedule. I do it every year, but I think we're somewhere between 30 and 40.
Maybe you could email us just so we'd have it.
It takes me a few days because it's one of the spreadsheets.
Yeah.
I have to print it out in big so I can tell where I'm at. But.
Okay.
Committee member Flesh and Commissioner West.
The 200,000 for the McLean building, is that additional items or is that to finish things already in process?
It's for additional, well, it's to finish things in process. I mean, we're Scott could probably, since he's been the project manager extraordinaire on this project, we put in 200,000 just for whatever things we think it's still not perfect yet.
So there's no specifics, that's just a contingency fund.
Well, we're estimating it will be no more than 200,000. I mean, yes.
Right now, there is no specific reason for that money.
I think there would be $200,000 left to do. But Scott?
Scott Archer, Community Services Director. That was the number that was put in there. Just we still have a few outstanding items. The projects, just kind of things, sort of the bills and different things, sort of come in, and so David was making sure that we had everything covered on that. We don't have any specific additional things identified. It's just it was part of the project budget. That still is within our initial project budget, just to make sure that we didn't have any remaining outstanding items, so we didn't go over the budget. Good. Yeah, I don't know that we're going to even spend that. It was just to make sure that we had everything covered. Our project actually was projected to be a fair bit under budget. So,
Commissioner West.
Going back to Doug's comment for Dave here, Mr. Wimmer, I mean, on the 130 million maximum indebtedness we can have. I was to the understanding that it was like a revolving credit card, so we have used maybe 30 million in the past, pay it off, and you can always renew it. It isn't that, no?
No, that 130 keeps coming down, so.
It comes off the total.
Like, simply, if we borrow $10 million, it drops $10 million. So, I mean.
Even though some of that, our urban renewal district was created many years ago with Hilltop and it's all paid off, so even that counts.
Hilltop's not part of this number. It had its own maximum indebtedness number, so. But, yeah, once you set it, then you just start accumulating, and when the total is 130 million, you're done.
So then when we just extended that indebtedness several years ago, so the monies before that, do they count towards the 130 million?
That's why I was talking about Dago when I said we're about 30 to 40, maybe 50 million. That goes clear back to day one.
I heard you say that, but
not the Hilltop.
I didn't get it. I still didn't.
That's very complicated.
Commissioner Neely, then.
No, actually, the answer just came out pretty sudden. He answered the question.
We are owners of the crack station down there. We have it built in for maintenance and stuff on there.
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw. Actually, we don't use urban renewal funding for maintenance, operations and maintenance anyway. That's not what you're supposed to use it for. So what we'll be having to do is do the maintenance of the Amtrak station out of either the street fund, because it is a transportation infrastructure, or the general fund, or it could be split or shared, and that's we don't anticipate the maintenance will be fairly significant for a while. And then the other thing is, once we start leasing out the building, if we can lease it out, depending on who goes in there, we're not sure. That's a future endeavor, is to occupy the building. Then that would change the landscape considerably as well. You might have fees, you might have maintenance agreements, etc. So it's not very well defined at this point, and it's something that we will be dealing with.
Part of that is if that is leased out, the income generated from that is going.
We would again. It's I don't believe it has to go necessarily anywhere, but it would to me, if I was managing that money, I would have it go towards maintaining the station, and then the city commission would decide if they wanted it to go into urban renewal or city commission or general fund or whatever. Am I correct on that?
Commissioner North? While you're there, do you want to talk about tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? Speaking of the Amtrak station.
Oh yes, tomorrow morning. If you've never seen a historic freight depot moved, it's going to be moved down Washington Street to its new location. They got a oversized vehicle permit from the city, and our crews were out there moving signs that were in the way today, and so that should be pretty exciting.
While you're there, and I think it has nothing to do with urban renewal, but I want to make sure. At one time we were talking about that in some fashion, the drug handle would be handled somehow for the urban renewal agency. That's no longer the case. You did indicate, though, I think it was at our last budget meeting, that ODOT has required work on the Holcomb-Redland intersection specifically. Does that have to be done in conjunction with the drug handle project, or is that separate?
There are actually going to be two components of the Holcomb-Redland Highway 213 improvements, and we're going to do the minor improvement, which is restriping Redland Road between Holcomb Boulevard and Abernethy and Highway 213. And in order to restripe and get satisfactory lane widths, we will need to do a few sliver fills on one of the embankments. But that's all we'll be doing with the jug handle money. Then we have to make improvements on Highway 213 to lengthen the left turn lane, to add a northbound through lane, and then also the southbound through lane will continue down to the Redland Bridge. It'll go underneath the Holcomb overpass and down to the Redland Bridge, really just completely beefing up the capacity of that intersection while preparing it to go into the canyon. and that we do not have funding through the jug handle. We have, we've made a request through our U.S. Congress for authorization money, which would be through the Highway Trust Fund, which at this time, they haven't renewed the Highway Trust Fund. You may know that Congressman Peter DeFazio has been working very hard on that in Washington, D.C., but for now, that part is not funded. We have made a request for funding for that phase.
Okay, does that hold up the jug handle project?
No, it does not.
Okay. And we don't, urban renewal, won't have to worry about that statement. Probably.
Well, there may be a local match that we would need to come and look for in a budget, and the urban renewal budget could be a likely budget that we would look for it in, but that at this point, we haven't budgeted for that, and that would be something we would need to solve later.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith.
Is the $10,000 for the Irmatina Health, is it in its own fund? Is this there? Until it's
We budgeted for it and it wasn't spent, so this goes, it's not budgeted again next year.
right, so it just sits there until it's spent, right?
No, we got appropriated somewhere else, because each year a budget stands by itself, so you budget one year, whatever's, you need to budget again the next year if you want to.
Yeah, then I think we need to address that. Well, I think it needs to be added back onto this year's budget.
Do we have a motion? I think we had a motion, essentially. So we have a motion to add $10,000 back to the budget for the Irma House, and a second by member Gifford. All right, any discussion? Oh.
Hello again. I just thought I should probably comment on that. So that money that was allocated, the $10,000, it's not certain that it, as you know, the budget runs through June 30th, through the end of the fiscal year. It's not determined yet whether or not we will expend that. So I'm not sure how you want to do that as a budget committee, but if we don't expend it, I think it does need to be reallocated if you wish to have that same dollar amount. We're working, as you know, we're working through some processes with National Park Service on potential of the house moving, and we're talking about how to thoughtfully do projects that you know, whether we're going to do those or the, you know, the Park Service is going to inherit some of those items. So we're just being cautious about how we spend that money, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to spend it before the end of this fiscal year, just because it's not expended right now. But if we don't expend it before the end of the fiscal year, if you wish that to be carried over, you'll have to come up with some type of action that will make that happen. So.
Make that contingent then? Can you make it mostly contingent on whether or not it gets spent this budget year or not?
Yeah.
Defer that one back.
So, we have an amendment from Committee Member Gifford to make it contingent upon whether or not that $10,000 gets spent this year, and that's okay. Discussion. Commissioner West on this.
Well, Mr. Wimmer, does that leave us with our $33,872 in our debt service reserve or contingency in a safe spot still? Taking out of $10,000 out.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you call 33,000 safe, I mean, the 33 would just go to 23. And
maybe you had to have a ratio of.
What I think is really sacred is the debt service reserve. That the 38,000 is, or 33,000 is just our general. That's a real easy fix. You know, it doesn't make difference which year you spend it now, because if we don't spend it, then we'll be in the beginning balance. We'll have it covered next year. Sort of the same way we did with the building here.
Any other discussion?
This is on discussion on Commissioner Smith's amendment.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Should we take a vote? Should we do a roll call? Yeah.
Commissioner Walter?
Yes.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Gifford?
Aye.
Chair Crocker?
Aye.
Commissioner Carlton?
Aye.
Commissioner Slack?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Kitchen?
Aye.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Geiger?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris? Commissioner Flesh? Commissioner Nacita? Commissioner Peterson? Commissioner Shaw?
There are some names that have been missed.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Hanson? Aye.
Was there anybody else? So what were the numbers on that? 15 in favor, 1 opposed, is that right?
16.
15 in favor, 1 opposed.
Out of them left, so you're down to 15 to 1.
15 passes 15 to 1. Committee member Flesh, is there a, can you just talk to us about why?
Structuring it that way encourages us to spend the money by June 30th, whether we need to or not. If we don't, then there's incentive to, there's incentive to spend it no matter whether we need it or not by June 30th in order to get it in the budget for the following year when we may be not responsible for that building anymore anyway. I just don't like the built-in incentive portion of it.
All right. Any other discussion about the budget? I did have one question, and in regards to the $80,000 in storefront grant match for last fiscal year. It looked like you were estimating that only $80,000 would get spent of the 100. Are you anticipating that, or you think
that was what we're at 60-some thousand now, and that was my guess.
Okay, but they have until the end of June. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a possibility that will get spent. In theory, maybe not. Yeah. Well, Commissioner Cedar first, and then.
I actually have something on a pretty significant different issue, so I'll defer to Mr. Wall.
Thank you. No, I just want to make sure, I know the budget numbers are reflected on when the expenditures occur, so it's cash basis for those grant programs, but I think we've tried to maintain, even though the spending may occur in a future period, fiscal period, that we don't want to over-obligate those funds just because we haven't paid the bills. So I think that we need to be realistic in terms of, I think we are close to $90,000 obligated on those grants. So I would prefer that we view it that way in terms of $90,000 expended. Does that make sense?
Want to reduce the 120 to 110 then?
I'm not. I don't.
Raise to 80 to 90. It's going to be the same. It's the same at the end.
Right. Well, I just want to make sure that we don't count that money twice. That we're counting it this year and next year. I mean, that we're counting against.
You have to be cognizant of when you make the grants next year that
we
only do 100 in grants, not 120 in grants, unless somebody backs out and says I don't want last year's money.
I think the way that the amendment, as I understood it, was phrased that it deals with that, and that is it's a carryover of what's not spent on the Irving. But you're talking about the other two. You're talking about the storefront grant, and I guess when I read the sheet, I was sort of interpreting it that way, that it was essentially a rollover, and what rolls over is what's available.
See, I interpret it as we were going to allocate more because it's been a very successful program.
That's why I want to make sure that everybody had the same point of view. There's no right or wrong, but I just want to make sure that.
So the way it's being presented is it's a rollover, basically. If 20,000 isn't spent in this budget year, it's a rollover. Commissioner, Commissioner Cedar first.
I have two items that I want to clarify. First, no money is allocated for this current fiscal year to the rivers on the spreadsheet that's on the screen right now. And I'm just wondering if it is appropriate at that point to remove it at all totally from the chart. All the evidence I have that the project is not going to happen, that the property owner is considering another party River Center Cal is just out of the picture, and it doesn't seem that the Rivers Mall has any relevance anymore to our urban renewal plan and budget. Just want to raise that issue as a potential amendment to this budget.
Nothing in the budget for that. This is that is your maximum indebtedness schedule for all your projects. And just so happens, whatever's on this side is what in the budget, but most of that stuff is not in the budget. So it's just sort of a scorecard to sort of keep track of what you think's going to happen. You can take it out if you want, but
I would make that motion to remove it.
And it's probably not the budget committee's decision to do that. I think
Or the full commission.
Well, I think really what it is, the way I look at it, it's just a spreadsheet, and that name of the project is just on there so you can look back. I think it might have some value to you if you look back at 09 and 10 and where it was in the prior queue as far as the amount of money that was estimated in the past. So that does give you some idea of what increment was at least forecasted, and you might want to call it something different in a different place in the district, but at least you have that point of reference. I don't think the spreadsheet really, at least as far as staff goes, this doesn't mean very much to us. It's just a spreadsheet for you folks to look back at the history and see whether, so we're not going to be out there, promoting it as a viable thing because it's noted on a spreadsheet. But if it makes everybody more comfortable to take it off, we can do that too.
I think I'll defer to Mr. Wimmer's point that it's probably more of a urban renewal full commission decision. The other point I wanted to raise was to return to Mr. Fraser's earlier discussion during his presentation about the aspiration that more resources be devoted to downtown. And that's something that's been a concern of mine that we do that. And I've expressed before that I would like to see serious consideration given to a budget for assisting some signature historic redevelopments in downtown that I think would have a real synergy with the rest of Main Street. Things like conversion to lofts and residences, and I'm sure that there would be issues like asbestos remediation and seismic upgrade that might make such signature projects currently and in the future not possible without such contribution by the Urban Renewal Agency. So I'll throw that out, but I did want to elicit from Mr. Fraser more detail on your thoughts, and if you had a number you were going to suggest, and where that would come from.
I really don't have a number where I would suggest it come from, but you could certainly use the same amount as a starting point as you're using for the facade renovation projects, and I think it would be pretty easy to spend that if you started doing mixed use and some of these historic structures. The short amount of time I had to look at this budget, I was sort of enthused about the potential for what you can do in the future. I was also admiring what had been done in the past, and then finally regretting the fact that this year there just isn't enough money there to fight over as far as what we can do. And I'm so pleased actually that at least there's the money in there for the facade renovation, because that is just, I have to say, in Grants Pass we had $10,000 a year for that, and I kept saying we need more. That's a bucket of paint or some brushes. It's just not enough to make a big difference. And so today in our staff meeting, I was even asking the staff, well, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, tell me what the downtown in Oregon City looked like compared to what it looks like today, and have people really, is the word out there, are people getting an idea that there's this program and they can take advantage of it, and is it making a difference? And it was pretty much a resounding yes around the room. And so I wish we had more money. If we had, I probably would have come up with an idea there for you, but maybe next year if we have some increment growth, that would be an excellent place to consider putting it.
Is there any possibility of making an allocation from the line of credit, or is that all spoken for?
It's all spoken for, for the code. You signed agreements with folks saying they're gonna do $10 million.
Good news is if it's successful and you start getting your increment going, then you know, this is like throwing a little piece of hamburger in front of a Rottweiler pack of problems. There's not enough to fight over, but if we had a great big steak, we might have a real decision-making quandary here about all the great ideas, because I know there's lots more than the ones I have.
Thank you.
Commissioner Norris and Smith and West. No, you're done. Go ahead.
I'm not gone. Would you please put this back to the...
Sure, I will be happy.
I'm down at the property.
I'll do it for you. I'll manage it for you.
I set off my car alarm today.
Anyways, I was wondering why you asked that question. Is it, you were wondering about the improvement in downtown to make it just a prettier place and a place that people want to do business in?
Where my concern comes from is that I believe the fundamental reason that urban renewal and tax increment financing exists historically was for the rehabilitation of blighted areas, especially downtown areas. Historically in Oregon City, especially this decade, we have kind of focused our attention outside of downtown with our tax increment resources. But the economic development strategy we've adopted is referred sometimes as the bookend strategy, where projects outside of downtown would be funded with urban renewal. Those areas would be would generate additional development and additional tax increment, and then based on that additional tax increment, that new tax increment would be assessed to provide resources for downtown. I've always expressed a bit of a dissent from that strategy, and I think that one of the reasons I've expressed a dissent from that strategy is I think it puts out a real commitment to downtown. It puts it out years, especially in a period now like a recession where the projects, especially in the north end, that were based on an economic paradigm from before the crash, aren't happening. So we're not getting that tax increment. Either we're not going to, or it's not going to happen as fast. I would rather see a strategy whereby we use the tax increment financing authority to help finance projects directly in the downtown area and use kind of like a synergy of the urban renewal money with other financing mechanisms that are out there and have long track records, like the federal historic investment tax credit that provides 20% of construction costs as a first year tax credit to the developer. So typically, one way of doing such a deal is to put together a package where there are a combination of gifts and tax credits, etc., to really start working on your downtown right away. And I like I said, I've not very much been in agreement with the strategy that we have taken. So when I'm in a forum like this, I typically voice what I think is a better alternative, or at least an alternative I would like the community to consider.
Do we have something like that right now, the federal tax credit?
The historic investment tax credit is a matter of federal law, specific Internal Revenue Code provisions, and any building downtown that is currently either designated or eligible for the National Register of Historic Places would be eligible for that tax credit, and there's a state tax credit also. So those are opportunities that I don't think we've been as aggressive as we should be to try to take advantage of, and they're available to us right now.
Well, something kind of like that, but they did their own thing. Portland had wanted to renew the area around MLK and north of that area, and for a while, anyways, I never did have the money to look into it, but for a while, property owners could get a tax abatement if they were to use the money to improve their properties. And I wonder if we can do something like that within Clackamas County. If we want to improve downtown, can we give the property owners and business owners some sort of tax incentive that's specific to that area and to our county?
Question for.
It's the tough year to raise taxes right now.
Is
Well,
it
back to
something
that,
that
unless,
we're
you
looking
know.
at, or can we do?
Well, that wouldn't be raising taxes, that'd be abating taxes, and that would be a process that would take legal review for one thing. And it just takes some time to develop a proposal like that and get back to the city commission would be the ones that would have to authorize that, and probably the district committee in addition to that. It may even require county commissioners to sign off on it, particularly if you're going to be abating their taxes. Not to mention the school district, any of the tax holders, tax entities affecting that property would all have to sign off, assuming it was authorized by statute. And I don't know because I haven't done any tax abatement in Oregon. It probably is available to municipalities, but I just haven't explored it.
We have 5 people in the queue. I know. Commissioner Smith, you had your hand up a little.
Well, I probably have more discussion before we vote, but the one comment I had earlier is about removing the rivers. I don't see that. I see. I mean, the name is specific to a development, but that name needs to be specific to the area, because whatever is going to happen down there, this is a list of projects and future projects, and so the area where the rivers was going to be, or whatever it's going to be in the future, still needs to stay on the list, but maybe not specifically. We've listed Clackamas Cove as just Clackamas Cove, so I wouldn't remove it off the list. It would probably change the river.
And Crossman Landfill.
I think renaming it Rockland Landfill so it might be more appropriate.
Better.
As long as you know where it is.
Commissioner West, did you no? Okay, Commissioner Yan.
I was just going back. First of all, your priorities, I agree with you. However, I think renovation and restoration does nothing to the tax increment. They're stuck at 3% unless you have a major overhaul. I think it expands the building or something of that nature. You won't see tax increment from the renovation work predominantly. Am I correct on that? So,
Because of the measure 5 and measure 50 limitation?
yeah. So we need big projects so we can drop these smaller projects as well. And we don't have them.
Well, let me ask you a question about that. So you can't go more than 3% unless the property is sold. Is that correct? Because the new purchase price.
That's not effective. No.
How did our property taxes on our building jump from 3,000 a year to 7,500 a year?
You did a major improvement over. I think Doug helped me here, but you could do a low amount of things, but if you go like let's say several hundred or 100,000 or so, then they do take a look at you.
Well, that's
put it back on at 60 or 70% of what it. If you did 100,000, you'd have like $60,000 of value, AV.
The level of investment I'm talking about, then I think would raise it to even greater than what the Proctor is reporting. So I'm not sure that limitation would be applicable then.
From my own experience rehabbing a couple buildings down on Main Street, we did see our property tax.
You're doing major stuff.
Yeah, we did, but I don't know how the county would know how much money we spent on the building. They just saw it look nicer and the sales price obviously of the property, but.
Then you are contributing. Will tip increment.
Oh yeah, I've more than paid back. I mean, the amount of money that we got from the storefront more than paid back what we originally got. So it's almost, it was an incentive for us to do it. But At the same time, we ended up paying it all back anyway, so. But it's great, it just helps.
If you got $10,000, you only did $10,000, you probably wouldn't notice any difference. If you got 10 and you did 100, then you probably would.
Committee member Flesh and West.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. Is the city already legally obligated for the $6.5 million for the Clackamas Cove?
I believe so.
Contractual, yeah, in the development agreement.
Mr. West.
To answer or to reply or respond to, gosh, I forget what I was going to say. What were we talking about here before that one?
Facade improvement.
Facade improvement, okay. To be investing in, and I am totally for historic preservation and incentives to do that. But the reason why I think that we had not settled on that as a strategy is, yes, the building would go up in value. Yes, it would have an additional increment. But the kind of investment we were making on the Cove, which is $10 million of our money to $170 million of theirs, was a 17-to-1 return on investment. Whereas we could put it into the Masonic building, and it's not that I'm opposed to that, but the return isn't going to generate enough to get us anywhere farther down the road. On the bigger picture, I'm still supportive of doing those things when we can figure out how to pencil it out.
I think if you were going to do that, you'd have to find a buyer before doing it, because the Masons aren't going to want to pick up their building and increase their property taxes by 10 times. Now, if you find a developer who would want to buy it from them, then that's another story.
Well, that's kind of like a catch-22 chicken and the egg situation, because if finding the buyer and the developer would be much easier if they knew that to what the city manager was talking about. If we were demonstrating a commitment to such projects through something very firm and specific in the budget for such, large-scale historic preservation projects, I think, helping the Masons find that buyer or that partner would be that much easier.
Sure.
Ready for motion?
Yeah, we have some motions. You have a motion?
Yep. The motion, hopefully. I would like to move to approve the proposed 2010-2011 budget to an adopted 2010-11 budget of $10,783,600 for our urban renewal.
With the one change, as adjusted.
As adjusted in previous minutes.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? I forgot. I did. Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Smith.
I appreciate the amendment for the Ermitanger House. I think that it's still extremely soon to assume that National Parks is going to take the house, and the house desperately needs repairs. This is a commitment that Commissioner Neely made last year. It hasn't been spent because we're hoping to use that as matching funds for other things that we haven't been able to have access to yet. But I don't think, saying that, the National Parks is going to take the house is this thing that we can keep throwing around. It could take years for that, and it's our city's responsibility to take care of this house. So I appreciate that this staying in there. I know that this budget's going to pass with flying colors, so I'm convinced that money will go through, but I will be voting no on the budget, and this is why. I still have extreme concerns about the Cove project. I was extremely vocal about the money that we're spending on the Amtrak station. I think that we do need that building, and I think it's appropriate for us to have that building, but I had other concerns that I stated at the time for voting against that. I never have voted for one penny for this City Hall building, and I refuse to do it today, and so I will still vote no on that. And I have a problem voting a budget again when we have no storefront guidelines. We voted our budget last year for storefront guidelines, or for storefront grants, but we didn't have any guidelines. We went through the entire year without finalizing the guidelines. We still haven't finalized the guidelines, and now we're going to start spending money again. So I think I can't support it.
Will people let me know? Any other discussion? Any questions?
We haven't talked about the economic development position. I understand this is a new position, and I'm unaware of the history leading up to this point. Has that person been hired? Excuse me.
Right there. Dan Brentland.
Okay. Is there any other committee members that have any questions on that? Because I'm just wondering, in this economic climate, with the few projects we have on our plate, and it's going to be a while before our economy is really in the position where we can put a whole lot of other things on our plate. Is this something that we need at this time?
I think from my standpoint, that person's charged with finding more business, bring business to downtown, or to Orange City, or specifically the urban renewal zone.
He's only funded partially from urban renewal. Okay. Majority of it.
In my position, I was in planning, so it's an additional.
But it's partially funded by the urban renewal budget.
Yeah, and that is additional expenditure.
I want to raise one other thing. You were successful in bringing in the $35,000 grant from Metro just this year, and so I think it's really important to continue those efforts because they do bring project funds into the commission that we wouldn't have access to without that effort being applied.
I would actually also like to just put the concept of the position being an investment, and yes, it's an additional expense, but we've got to make the investment to be able to get the additional projects.
Speaking of investment, there's one thing I actually neglected to mention, and I'm sorry that an issue I failed to bring up, and I'm sorry I did, and that's the success of the Main Street Oregon City organization. And I know it has gotten some funding, it still gets some funding from the city, and it has gotten some funding from the county as well. But I don't know, maybe Commissioner Slack can talk about if we are getting more, if Main Street is getting more funding from the county, or something I would like to bring up. Frankly, I think the organization, Main Street Oregon City, does an amazing job downtown, not only of recruiting business, marketing the area to not only the citizens of Oregon City, but the citizens in the surrounding communities, but also playing a very important role in regards to communication between certain agencies, certain outside government agencies, certain politicians, bringing a lot of really good exposure to Main Street, which is right in the middle of the urban renewal area. And would that be something we would be willing at looking at maybe partially funding out of the professional development, the contract services? Would that be something that any of us would be interested in looking at appropriating any portion of that contract services to support that program? Mr. West.
Would that be, Mr. Fraser, something we could put on an urban renewal work session as an item?
It's already on it's one of our goals that we set at the retreat, which was looking at an EID or some kind of funding for the downtown and the urban renewal. So I think it's something we're going to cover in urban renewal in the future. In fact, I know that Lloyd and I are already talking with Dan about how to go about looking at that and bring something forward to urban renewal.
Okay, so that is something we need to put specifically in this budget. Okay.
You have sufficient monies probably in your, you do have consulting fees here, and you could look at that line item. There's about $500,000 in there, and you've got some pretty big fees coming with some of these projects, so you're going to want to, that would be the source that I would go to if you're going to make that adjustment. But you don't have to do it this evening. You probably want to wait until you know more about the expenditures from those consultants.
Okay. Any other discussion about the motion?
On your motion, you also need to include in it that you're going to levy 100% of the division of taxes and no special levy.
Okay.
Well, the $10 million number.
So the
motion stands amended according to Mr. Wimmer.
Okay. And the second?
Yes.
Levy the 100% of taxes.
From last year's minutes, it says, Mr. Neely seconded and by Slack to forward the budget to the Urban Renewal Commission for consideration in the amount of $19,134 and to levy 100% of division of taxes and no special levy. It's the same thing except the number is $10,783,600 versus $19 million.
We need to read that off again then?
Mhm.
Do you adopt?
Now I have to get my other page with my number out, which is put away. I would like to make a motion to approve the $10,783,600 for the adopted 2010-11 budget as amended with, for $10,000 to the Ermitanger House as a line item, and to levy 100% of the division of taxes with no special levy.
And a
Second.
Second. All right, any other further discussion? Not, let's take a vote, please.
Commissioner Walters?
Yes.
Commissioner Neely?
Yes.
Commissioner Gifford?
Aye.
Commissioner Crocker?
Yes.
Commissioner Carlton?
Aye.
Commissioner Hanson? Commissioner Slack?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Kitchen?
No.
Commissioner West?
Aye.
Commissioner Geiger?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Sledge?
No.
Commissioner Nasir?
No.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
All right, motion passes 12-4, is that correct? Okay. And we already talked about item number 8, specifying the amount of tax revenue, right? Or not? Yep. And number 9 and number 10. All right, those are all included. We got all those in here? Okay. I now call the Urban Renewal Budget Committee meeting Tuesday, April 27, 2010 adjourned. Thank you.